Hi everyone, my name is Uri, and I'm really excited to give the first keynote talk at GraphQL Galaxy. Today I'm going to talk about Envelop, our new GraphQL plugin system that you should use on your servers today. But there's also, for this talk, I have a surprise secondary title talk. Batteries included Reimagined, the revival of GraphQL Yoga. Those of you who know the guild and know GraphQL Yoga should get excited by now. I'm going to talk a bit about it later. Stay tuned. So, the Guild is the largest open source group in the GraphQL ecosystem. We develop many libraries. They all fit into one big vision, but the idea is that each library is individual. So, some examples are GraphQL Code Generator, GraphQL Tools and schema stitching, GraphQL Mesh to basically take any source like OpenAPI, Swagger, gRPC, SQL, and generate GraphQL APIs out of them. GraphQL Inspector for preventing breaking changes, GraphQL modules for distributing the work between many different teams in the enterprise, and many others. And the philosophy of the guild is that each of these tools should and is developed completely independently. You don't need to use the other tools in order to use any of the tools here. They are fitting into one big platform from the database and the data sources all the way to the front end, but you're not vendor locked. You could gradually introduce these tools when you actually see fit and you see the need. Also, part of our philosophy is not to develop tools that we just want to develop, but only tools that we see a necessity and a need. We rather rely on other open source tools and also contribute to them. But every time we see that the library is not maintained or is not able to accept things that we need from it, only then we basically create a new library, or what we do many times is we take unmaintained libraries and revive them. So at the beginning of this year, we saw a lot of need around the GraphQL server ecosystem, and we tried to figure out what do we need and how can we improve it. We tried to contribute it and have talks with existing frameworks in the community, and we ended up creating our own solution. So today I want to talk with you about Envelop. You should also check out the website and look at it there. But I want today to start actually for what was our mindset when we started actually creating Envelop. So the first thing we started asking ourselves, we looked at the existing ecosystem, we asked, what do we actually need from a GraphQL server? I mean, this is like a slide that I use in many of my talks. Basically, you see here a client queries a GraphQL server. The GraphQL server then sends calls to all kinds of sources and all kinds of places, and the server will send me back one result, orchestrate all the calls, and will send me back one result as I expect. And this is something we all know. What is the mechanism here and what do we need from it? So the core of it is GraphQL JS itself, the reference implementation. And the reference implementation, actually, if we look at the code inside, basically expose a couple of functions for us. Validate, parse, execute, and subscribe. Validate is around validating the schema and the query to make sure that it's actually a valid schema and query. Parse is parsing the query as AST and understand and make it into a document that we can execute. And then the execute function itself, which I gave a lot of talks around how it looks inside. This is like a pseudocode slide about what's actually happening inside the execute function, meaning the execute function will get the executable schema and the query, and then do all the orchestration and automation work to get the right result in the shape that we want, orchestrating everything that's happening with the network calls or the resolvers. So that's basically the execute function and GraphQL JS. Those are the things that GraphQL JS gives us. But then there's the server. What are the extra things that GraphQL JS doesn't give us that we need from a GraphQL server? So one thing is the schema creation itself. GraphQL JS has its own way of creating the schema, but the community actually diverges and created many different solutions to create the schemas, like SDL first, code first with tools like Nexus or GraphQL, which is very exciting and worth checking out, and many others. So you want to create your own schema in many different ways. The other thing that we need to connect GraphQL JS to is actually the communication layer. We need to connect it to an HTTP server, maybe work across WebSockets, and maybe we want to deploy it in a serverless environment, and we need all kinds of constraints and things there. And we want our GraphQL server to take care of that for us. And there's many different things around operating that GraphQL server: caching and performance, tracing, logging, security and auth, and a good error handling. And of course, we want the GraphQL server to have a thriving ecosystem. We want people to be able to create many different solutions across the GraphQL server, so we could use it in any of our use cases, and not rely on one single use case that's the only thing that we need for our server. So once we figured that out, we looked at the actual landscape, and this is like a very opinionated slide. You can argue with us, and I would love to. But we think that the current server ecosystem has some issues. First of all, the current most popular frameworks out there are very opinionated and sometimes not well maintained. And I think the combination of these two is very problematic. So first of all, being very opinionated means you're fitting into certain types of use cases, usually simple use cases, and because you want to get a lot of community and stuff like that. But then, if you combine that with a poorly maintained or library, then it means that now your users can't actually change things and can't get things up to date. So together, this is a very problematic situation, and this is something we faced a lot when we worked with our clients. We needed a lot of more complex setup and handling all kinds of cases, and the current libraries just weren't enough. It was very hard to maintain, and we had to write a lot of weird code in order to get things going. Also, frameworks being maintained means that they are they make you build things in a certain way, and then a lot of the solutions that they provide are not being shared between different types of HTTP servers or different types of how you create your schema, like if you're using code first or schema first. Like everything around the server could be shared no matter what are your choices, but in many of these libraries and frameworks, because they're opinionated, you can't. Another thing is that in the same similar concept, those frameworks wrap the entire request pipeline. So that's okay if you're doing, again, something very simple. But first of all, it depends. Sometimes if you work with an HTTP server, like let's say Festify or Express or Koa, you want to use their full power. And second of all, sometimes you're actually deploying in environments that are different. And you want to actually have the full flexibility, like Edge, Cloudflare workers and Edge deployments, and then you need more flexibility in how you handle these things. You want to hook into this system and have the full power, so you can deploy it anywhere. And some frameworks do allow for minimum extensions and things like that, but from our experience, it was very hard to work with, and we kept trying to contribute. We kept trying to help them do things better, but at some point we got into a limit. And there was another thing where some of the frameworks are built for a certain purpose. They built for you to use more of the tools of these companies, and that means that the technical choices also, you see that in the technical choices, and that means that it's hard to use all kinds of custom-made solutions that sometimes are needed for complex applications with these server frameworks and their architectures. So we went back to the drawing board, and what you see here is actually the first sketch that we had of Envelop. And I'll try to kind of like reverse engineer what we were thinking at the time. So we took GraphQL JS and we took the function that it exposes: parse, validate, execute, and subscribe. And we thought, what if we could hook into the system? We could maybe hook before and after parse, before and after validate, add functions before and after all of this, so we can change anything. And then we can still expose the same API. So anyone that uses just GraphQL, the reference implementation, could still use the same thing, but now we got hooks into the system with powerful plugin system. Each plugin could basically hook into each of these, into every step of GraphQL. And then also we connected, basically just gave you the option to give your schema. So and that schema could be anything, could be Nexus, could be graphical, could be schema first with GraphQL tools, and also federation, which I'll maybe mention later on. And then this is all in separation of the request HTTP request pipeline. So when you handle the HTTP request pipeline, we leave it to the best tools that do that work, like Fastify, Express, Koa, and also maybe in other environments like serverless environments. So you have the full power, and you just use these frameworks as they're intended to. There's no reason for us to make a better Fastify or to wrap Fastify for you. So that's Envelop. And that's what we released about a year ago. And this was a game changer for us. We deleted so much code working with clients using this system. And today the ecosystem around it is huge, and I'll now share why. So what are the things that we actually, that Envelop helped us with? First things, there's a lot of hard GraphQL things that we kept repeating and doing again and again with every client. And now, instead of repeating these things, and depends on the client and depends on the setup, now we could turn that logic into a plugin and share it across all the ecosystem, all of our clients, and all of our open source users. So here is an example. When we start an Envelop server, in this example, we get an extremely performant server just by adding 3 plugins with 3 lines of code: use parser cache, use validation cache, and use GraphQL JIT. Just by adding these 3 things, our basic server becomes way faster than probably your server today. And you, as a server developer, didn't need to do much. You just needed to choose some plugins and add them with one line of code, and that's it. But for the plugin developer, they had a very powerful API to hook into every step of the system. And I think that's the power of Envelop. For the users, for the server developers, it's extremely easy. And for the plugin developers, it's extremely powerful. You're not losing, the simplicity doesn't interfere with the power. And now you could actually, and also when we started building all these plugins, we saw more and more people from the community actually contributing. So we created a plugin hub. It's a place where you can just explore, and there's many, many different plugins today for many hard things that people used to create a lot of conference talks and a lot of blog posts about it. Now it's as easy as writing a plugin. Like there's plugins for caching, tracing with whatever you want: Prometheus, Datadog, New Relic, Sentry, OpenTelemetry, Apollo tracing, loggers. You could use persistent queries, so all kinds of plugins around security, like rate limiting, depth limiting, cost analysis, all these things, and many, many others. So again, you get a very rich ecosystem that you could use with whatever technological choices you want to make. So, and that leads me to the second point, which is we can now, with a plugin, solve each problem once and share it across the ecosystem, which is a very powerful idea that for some reason wasn't until now. So it doesn't matter where you deploy, an Envelop server could use the same plugins and be deployed using any HTTP server and in any environment, including Cloudflare workers on edge, which is what we usually do. So this is an extremely powerful thing. And also, you could use any schema you want, including, by the way, Apollo Federation. So with some clients that we have that use Apollo Federation, we actually replaced the Apollo Gateway. We just, in place, we took out Apollo Gateway on the existing federated services and put in Envelop with Apollo Federation support. And now we get both the benefits of Apollo Federation and all the powerful plugin system of the ecosystem. And that was really, really cool to do. The third thing that I think was really cool with Envelop is that it now became a framework for frameworks. You could use it just as is, but it's also a plugin system that is very powerful. So now all kinds of different frameworks could actually being built on the same core infrastructure. Instead of just building on top of GraphQL JS, they have the Envelop plugin system. So each framework can choose their opinions and make it easy for you, but still share plugins and still share solutions. There's many different examples of frameworks that already work with Envelop. The most famous one that you're probably gonna see today, and there's a talk later on in GraphQL Galaxy, is Redwood JS. Redwood is an amazing framework. You can build apps extremely quickly with this. And they, at the beginning, were based off Apollo Server. And then for all kinds of reasons, they decided to also add Envelop support. Once they added Envelop support, their initial idea was to actually give the users options to use Apollo Server and Envelop. But after a month of using Envelop, they just removed Apollo Server completely, and now with their 1.0 version, they're completely on Envelop. And they wrote an amazing blog post about why, and forum post about why they did it. And I think you should read it because there's a lot of benefits to do that. And there's many more frameworks coming. So you could use Envelop as is, but you could also use frameworks that are built on top of Envelop. And there's one more thing that I'll mention soon. Another thing that we saw is that when we started using Envelop and we started sharing these pieces of code and plugins, a lot of times a lot of our clients are actually large corporations, and they want to have a certain way. They have many teams that are building their own GraphQL server, and they're also in charge of deploying them and maintaining them. But they want to have some kind of conformity. For example, one way of logging or saving tracing, or all kinds of security rules that they want to share between all the different teams and all the different GraphQL servers that they have. So what we created was kind of like an envelope of envelopes. So you can create basically a base plugin that has all the shared plugins in your company, and then you can share that across all the different servers, and the servers could add and customize their own plugins. But now you basically created a powerful shared infrastructure across all of your organization. One example is Clara, is one of our great clients, and recently they actually tweeted and talked about how they moved their whole infrastructure to Envelop, and the amazing thing that it made them, that it helped them across the whole company. There's many more of these, and I hope to soon share more and more of these case studies and many companies that did that transition. But the last thing that is really cool with Envelop is that it also acts, because we are hooking into the system, it also can act as basically a Babel for GraphQL. So if you think about the JavaScript ecosystem, for many years now, we're using all kinds of features that are not necessarily supported with all the browsers or are not in the spec. But we already use them thanks to tools like Babel and many others. With Envelop, we now have the same capability, but with GraphQL. We, specifically the guild, are using for over a year now across all of our servers. We're using defer and stream, live queries, with the one-off directives, and many other very powerful tools and many very powerful GraphQL primitives that are not yet in the spec. It takes time for things to get into the spec, and for good reasons, but it doesn't mean that you can't and shouldn't use them. All these tools are extremely powerful and made the way we write GraphQL servers way better. And thanks to Envelop, you could actually use that today. So to learn more about Envelop, you should go to our website. Also on the YouTube, we have a YouTube link there on the bottom. You can actually find a talk that I gave that for basically in 15, 20 minutes, I start a server from scratch with 0 lines of code into a full server with defer and stream and live query support. So you should check out that talk and also, of course, the docs and start using Envelop. But today I have one more surprise. So Envelop, like I said, is a framework of frameworks. And at the Guild, we always try to be to start with the core and being open and very flexible, and not be too opinionated. But if some of the people in the community are aware of this symbol and what it represents, for many years we had basically a very famous GraphQL framework in the community. It was called GraphQL Yoga. It was extremely simple. All the goal of this framework, it was built by Prisma, and their goal was to make it as simple as possible to start a GraphQL server. And it really pushed at the time, it pushed the edge of like how easy it is and how simple it is to start a GraphQL server. Prisma moved on to other ventures and were less focused around it, but they were very kind to work with us and to hand us over GraphQL Yoga. And I'm very happy to announce today that we just released the first version, 2.0 alpha version of GraphQL Yoga that you can start using today. The idea here is that GraphQL Yoga, we basically rebuilt GraphQL Yoga to be a wrapper around, an opinionated wrapper around Envelop. So you can enjoy everything I just said about Envelop, but still start extremely easy and basically have a batteries included framework that has in not only like the batteries that that is included with is out of the box. You get GraphQL subscription support, defer and stream support, official and up to date local host graphical support. You don't need to have graphical in the cloud or anything like that. And it's modern, it's up to date, it's extremely performant. It's still very flexible because you can still completely customize it thanks to Envelop plugins. And the most important thing is that, like all of the libraries of the Guild, this is going to be maintained for the long term. For the past 4 or 5 years, we basically show the community that every library we maintain is there for the long run. And now, finally, we have a GraphQL server, a full GraphQL server framework that is here to stay and to get better and better and better. And it's already the best in the community. So I really hope you should try. You go and try it out. Just Google GraphQL Yoga, get to the repo, and the alpha 2.0 version was just released, and we want your feedback. So to summarize, we thought that you deserve and the ecosystem deserve a better server ecosystem when you actually go into production. When it was always very easy to start, but when you go into production, things started to get a bit less flexible and a bit less powerful. So now, thanks to Envelop and Yoga, you get a modern GraphQL server. You can use the power of the open community. You don't need to rely on a certain ecosystem. You don't need to rely on the Guild. There's a whole ecosystem of plugins. Our tools and our libraries are always up to date and always well maintained for the long run. So now the combination of Envelop and GraphQL Yoga should give you a lot of powerful a really powerful server that you can really build upon safely. Not to mention that you can still use all the other frameworks that are all in the ecosystem of frameworks that are still built on Envelop, like Redwood JS, for example. So thank you very much for listening. I really hope to get more of your feedback around this, and because we're mostly proud in the guild of always being there, always listening to the community and improving according to the community's needs, and not just by random ideas that we have. Thank you so much, and have a great GraphQL Galaxy conference, everyone.